Hello all, I just wanted to clear something up before I get started. I privated the shorter video I uploaded with my ad nauseum video on the UltraView UV button because I got something completely wrong on it and I didn't want to leave it up with incorrect info. I stated that the UV hinges when they first came out, the aluminum version started at $2.99 and the price was lower due to all the complaining. Turns out I missed that they had released the brass version at the same time at $2.99, and the aluminum was $1.99 and stayed that price until the 2.0 came out and knocked it off its pedestal. So my lousy memory twisted that into something it wasn't, and though there was a lot of complaining, they never actually changed the price of it due to any kind of backlash. So I just wanted to get that out and make the correction. So now that that's out of the way, let's get into why I'm actually doing this video. So I just got back from the R100 in Allentown, New Jersey, and damn, I got sunburned. I did the safari half of the 100 target course, since that was all the time I had available this weekend, and it was also rather hot and humid. I downed a bottle of generic Powerade at the halfway point, and then 2 more bottles when I finished. So I was pretty bushed when I got home, and then proceeded to fall asleep on my couch. That said, I didn't break anything or lose anything, so I consider it a successful outing. So thankfully I wasn't shooting for score, since I brought with me my new UV button, a Stan Onyx thumb, and a Stan Onyx hinge, and then I switched back and forth between them. The way many, not all, but many of the YouTube videos and reviews that have come out so far, they've been positively swooning over the UV button. I figured with all that praise I would be drilling the 10 ring from 110 yards out, hitting 8s and 9s with my eyes closed, and everyone else around me would be shooting better scores just by osmosis, just being around it. Instead, what I got was a release that works pretty much the same as any other release, and worked just about the same as my Onyx thumb. I did a little better with my hinge once I remembered that I do actually know how to use a hinge, but I'll talk about the Onyx hinge in another video. It's actually really good. The one thing the UV button did a little better, and as it turns out it does 2 things better, was the feel on the draw is a little more comfortable on the UV button than the Onyx because the UV button is not tapered, so you can spread the pressure across all 3 fingers more evenly. Conversely, the large Onyx, which is the closest match as far as the size of the finger beds between the medium UV button, the Onyx is a little thicker than the medium button, but the ring finger is thinner, so my ring finger isn't as inclined to get involved on the draw, so you end up with more pressure on your index and your middle. Neither of them are actually uncomfortable to draw, so it's going to come down to either personal preference or whether you like the feature set of one versus the other. The anchor points on the Onyxes were identical, not surprisingly, because of course they were. They have the exact same handle and hook location, and the UV button was noticeably longer due to the size and length of the neck. I had to use something of a floating anchor to get everything lined up with the button, and I ended up having to kind of spread my upper body out a little bit more in order to be able to use it. The UV button had a tendency to impact to the left of the Onyxes, mostly due to the position of the hook being over the middle finger instead of in between the index and the middle, so it's going to pull the string out away from your face ever so slightly if you try to anchor the same as a release with a different neck length and hook position. If you're looking for consistency and accuracy, then setting up your bow for a single release or a release and a button with the same handle is going to be the way to go, as opposed to doing what I'm doing, which is using vastly different releases on the same bow. I am having a lot of fun with it, but if I photographed each target I shot, well, it's a good thing I'm not pretending to be a better shot than I am. At least that trash panda never knew what hit him. So a couple of random tips and quirks. Make sure you make it part of your routine to cock the UV button or the Onyx thumb before you try to hook it to the D-loop. That sounds like it should be obvious, but with the hook being held in place by a magnet and a spring, respectively, it is easy to forget that you might not have pressed the cocking buttons yet. The magnet isn't strong enough to support the weight of the release, and it will fall off. I almost dropped this button once, and then I remembered that I had a similar situation getting used to the Stan Perfex, and I didn't end up doing it again. The Perfex, the aluminum version of the Perfex, the spring is actually strong enough to hold it on the loop, but the second you touch it, it'll just fall off. You know, learn that through experience. Most of the time I ended up just recocking them before I put it back in my holster, and that became a good element of my routine, and that saved me the trouble of having to pick this up out of the dirt. On that subject, for most of the shoot it felt awkward to load the release onto the D-loop. It just wasn't slipping through as easily as the promos seemed to make it look. I had to either get my middle finger around to come around and press the D-loop onto the or up and through the retainer clip, or brace the release with my thumb and then use my index finger to do the same. That is until I realized that if I press the string retainer clip to the part of the D-loop right above the bottom knot of the D-loop, then it would slip right on without having to use my finger at all. The Stan Onyx actually doesn't do that nearly as easily. The tension on the spring retainer clip, or spring gate, or whatever Stan calls it, is a little bit stiffer than the one that's on the UV button. So this one you still kind of have to bring up your finger and then just kind of slip it on, which is easier being the way that the hook opens into your face, so it's easier to just push it right on. It's one of those why didn't I think of this sooner moments, and the promo videos make it look way smoother than in real life unless they're using really stiff D-loop material. Like the BCY24 I use for my D-loops doesn't provide enough resistance at the loop to open the string retainer clip. It just kind of goes with it when you try to push it into it. So I'm going to cut here and show a close-up video of exactly what I mean. The other thing is if this is intended for hunters, then it should be really easy to, I mean, frankly, they should have just went with a mechanism that just closes the hook when you hit the cocking button. I mean, the thing is expensive enough as it is that it might as well just be a double action release instead of a single action with a retainer clip. But, yeah. So that's just my opinion. Anyway. It's a little too awkward to do that, but it is easier to just use your middle finger with the Onyx just to clip it on there. Something that was pointed out in the comments of my video, along with a few other things, is that the trigger stem on my stainless button actually has some side-to-side wiggle to it when it's not cocked, but it becomes solid when it is cocked. It doesn't continue to flex like that. The release functioned fine, but it's an odd quirk that none of my other releases have, so I'm going to keep an eye on that. I don't know if it's just they went with looser tolerances on the trigger stem, or because the trigger stem is actually thinner. It's thinner than the cocking button. Looks like it's half the thickness. So for whatever reason, it wiggles, and it doesn't seem to affect its function though. The thumb barrel not having multi-axis adjustability didn't really bother me, though I had to fish around a little bit to wrap my thumb around it. It would eventually get easier with repetition and practice, so it's fine. The point of impact difference between the Onyx hinge, the Onyx thumb, and the UV button were pretty similar as long as I accounted for the difference in anchor point. That says more about me than it does the releases, so it's more important to note that I did not have any misfires or inconsistencies of the loosing of arrows, and I still have all my teeth. The trigger is very good on the button, however, with all the trouble they went to have their internals riding on plastic bushings, it did not result in a quieter shot overall. Like I said before, the quietest bow is louder than the loudest release, so I couldn't tell a lick of difference in noise between the Onyx and the button, despite the button being noticeably quieter than the Onyx in a quiet room. So, like I said, the sound of your bow is going to drown out the sound of your release any day, and if you really want something that's dead silent, you could get something like a Hotshot Vapor or a Trueball Max Hunter, which doesn't have a sear. And even something like a Trueball Rave is quieter than this and has a pretty good trigger. So, So all the trouble they did to make this quieter, it's ultimately moot. And I guess part of that is to justify the price, and the other is to have it as a selling point, but ultimately it doesn't make a difference, in my opinion. So after having shot, I don't know, probably 50 arrows with it, I didn't take one shot at every target because, yeah, I was shooting for fun. So have I changed my mind that the UV button is worth the cost? No, not really. I still think it's overpriced. It feels good and has a good trigger, but it's one of those releases where you have to commit to it fully, just like the UV 2.0 hinge, and you can't really use anything else effectively on the same bow without having to make changes to your form or reconfigure your bow. And that is just not something I'm going to do when I'm literally swimming in releases. So I think that about covers it. If anybody has any questions, please leave them in the comments. And yeah, until next time, take care, stay safe, and happy hunting. Hello all, I just wanted to...